Thanks, Eva. Okay, so just to give you an overview of what we will be covering today, I'll start by giving you a quick introduction to Key Action 2 and what funding is available. The main focus of the session will be the application form. We'll first talk you through what you need to do beforehand, then we will go through the application form together, filling out certain parts, showing you how to use the distance calculator and how to validate the form. Then we will round up the key points, and finally we'll mention the next steps and how to contact us for support in the run-up to the deadline. Okay, so as you hopefully know, in this session we will be focusing on Key Action 2, Cooperation for Innovation and the Exchange of Good Practices. Key Action 2 is all about the cooperation and collaboration. It offers opportunities for organisations from different countries and different sectors to work together to share good practice and innovation and to improve the provision for learners. The UK National Agency, which is a partnership between the British Council and eform UK, is responsible for managing strategic partnership projects. The decentralised action under Key Action 2. Strategic partnerships in the field of VET are managed by the team at eform UK. Other types of projects under Key Action 2, such as knowledge and sector skills alliances, are managed centrally by the executive agency of the European Commission. We won't be talking about these types of projects during the webinar today, but you can find more information in Part B of the programme guide from page 125 onwards. Strategic partnerships are cooperation projects which allow organisations to work together to improve the quality of education and training provision, tackle common issues, and share or develop innovative practice. As you are aware, one organisation applies for funding on behalf of the whole partnership, and if the project is approved, this partner has overall responsibility for managing the funding and is accountable to the national agency for the project. Strategic partnerships are flexible in terms of what they can entail and in size. This means that there is flexibility in terms of the activities you implement, as long as your application can demonstrate that these activities are the most appropriate to achieve the objectives defined for the project. Projects can be one of the following two types. Firstly, strategic partnerships developing innovation. These projects are expected to develop innovative outputs and/or undertake intensive dissemination and exploitation activities. Strategic partnerships supporting innovation can request specific funding for intellectual outputs and multiplier events in order to support the delivery of their objectives. Secondly, strategic partnerships supporting exchange of good practices. The main objectives of these projects is to allow organisations to develop and reinforce networks, increase their capacity to cooperate at a transnational level, and exchange ideas, practices, and methods. Depending on their objectives, projects may also develop tangible outputs, and are still expected to disseminate their results of their activities in a way that is proportionate to the aims and scope of the project. These results and activities will be co-financed through the standard project management and implementation budget, and no separate funding will be available to develop intellectual outputs or multiplier events. The type of strategic partnership to be developed will need to be selected within the application form. It is therefore important to give careful consideration before applying to the type of project that is best suited to your objectives and the experience and capacity of your partnership. Also, when preparing your project and choosing your partners, it is important to carefully consider the experience and capacity of the participating organisations. Whilst large-scale projects are supported, it is also possible to deliver smaller-scale cooperation projects. The grant will vary depending on the size and scale of the project, and I will talk more about this when we look at the budget section of the application form. There are opportunities to develop strategic partnerships focusing in one field of education and training, or to develop cross-sector projects. You can find more information about this on our website, but in this webinar we will focus specifically on strategic partnerships for vocational education and training. Projects focusing on vocational education and training can develop a wide range of activities, including around topics such as developing, testing, adapting and implementing innovative approaches in VET learning and teaching methodologies, for example, focusing on delivering key competencies, basic skills and language skills. They can also promote recognition and certification of skills and competencies by referencing them to European and national qualification frameworks and using EU instruments. Also, they can focus on implementing credit transfers such as ECVET and quality assurance EQA-VET by VET providers. Where relevant, you may want to consult the website of the ECVET Experts UK. This website provides practical online tools for implementing the ECVET principles in practice, such as case studies, online resources, and useful links. The examples provided on this slide are just some ideas and not an exhaustive list. You can also refer to the examples provided in the programme guide, page 111 and 278 to 279 for inspiration, and you should always ensure your project idea fits with action priorities listed on page 107 to 110. It's important to link your Key Action 2 project to the overarching European priorities and show the added value of carrying out the project on a European level. When doing so, it is important to keep the general objectives of the Erasmus Plus programme in mind. More information about this can be found in Part A of the Erasmus Plus programme guide, as well as to remember the following important features. Firstly, recognition and validation of skills and qualifications. For example, by using Europass or ECVET in the field of vocational education and training. Secondly, dissemination and exploitation of project results. For example, the use of the Erasmus Plus logo, as well as the Erasmus Plus project results platform, which is a contractual requirement for Key Action 2 projects. You should also remember about the open access requirements for educational materials, documents, and media produced through the Erasmus Plus programme. Another important feature is the international dimension, i.e. cooperation with organisations from different countries. Moreover, there is a multilingualism by requesting funding for linguistic support for long-term learning, teaching and training activities if applicable. Also, bear in mind that equality and inclusion, for example, by facilitating the access to learners with disadvantaged backgrounds and fewer opportunities compared to their peers. And a final feature is protection and safety of participants by making sure all participants are safe and supported during their project activities. In addition to these features, in order to be funded, a strategic partnership must either address at least one horizontal priority for strategic partnerships, an overview of which can be found on pages 107 to 108 in the programme guide, or at least one specific priority relevant to the field of vocational education and training, an overview of which can be found again on page 108 to 110 in the programme guide. Where a project addresses a horizontal priority, it is still important to show how the project will impact on the field of VET. In 2016, projects addressing the horizontal priority of inclusive education, training and youth will be considered highly relevant. However, in all cases, projects will need to clearly demonstrate how the project objectives and the planned activities will address the selected action priority or priorities. Okay, so what is a Key Action 2 strategic partnership? One organisation applies to their country's national agency on behalf of the entire partnership. Projects can be of different sizes, but you will need a minimum total of 3 partners from 3 different programme countries, including the applicant. You can find the definition of a programme country on your handout. The lead or applicant organisation must always be from a programme country, although partner countries can participate as partners only if their participation brings clear added value to the project. Projects can last from 12 up to 36 months, and you need to choose the duration of the project at application stage, and this cannot be changed. However, the latest possible end date is 31st of August 2019. Projects can be different sizes, and funding will reflect this, as you will build up your project budget from a series of unit costs per activity up to a maximum total budget. The maximum budget is a variable amount defined by multiplying €12,500 per month for the duration of the project with a maximum of €450,000 for a 36-month project. There is no formal requirement for match funding in the project budget, although the principle of co-financing applies. Please see page 242 of the programme guide for more information. So once you have decided what it is you want to do, you've set up your partnership and thought about how to address different European priorities, you will need to complete the following 2 registration steps. You will need to register on ECAS first. ECAS is the European Commission's authentication service, and you will need to register here to use any type of external European Commission tool. We have a video guide on our website which will talk you through how to do this, and you can find the link to this in your handout. You will then need to obtain a participant identification code, otherwise known as a PIC, to access the participant portal. The participant portal is a single entry point for the electronic administration of EU-funded projects related to Erasmus+. You will be prompted to provide information about your organisation as well as upload documents related to your organisation. These documents are needed to prove the legal status and financial capacity of your project, and it is essential that the information on these documents matches the information on the portal. If your organisation already has a PIC, you should use that one and not create a new one. Please make sure all the information is still up to date, and if your organisation does not have a PIC, but do double check, you will need to obtain one. Please bear in mind that if you are applying for a new PIC, it is important to make sure that you register on the correct participant portal, as there are different ones. The link provided in the handout is for the Education, Audiovisual, Cultural, Citizenship and Volunteering portal. However, if you do just search on the internet, you might come across the Research Participant portal. You can find further information about the application process in Part C of the programme guide. Please download the partner mandate templates from our website and have them filled in by your respective partners and signed by both parties. Make sure that the information such as the name of the organisation, address and legal representative on the partner mandate is identical to the information in the application form. Otherwise, the partner mandate will not be accepted. Okay, so after brainstorming your project idea and following the registration process, you can move on to the application form. The application form is an eForm and will need to be submitted online by the applicant organisation by the deadline of 31st of March 2016. Please keep in mind that this is 11 a.m. UK time, as the deadline for applications is generally 12 p.m. Brussels time. You will need to use your PIC as well as your partner's PICs to fill out the application form. It is therefore important that the PIC information is correct for all partners, as it will be used throughout the lifetime of your project, and it is your responsibility to keep the information up to date. To make sure you have the correct application form in front of you, you should double check that it states the call as 2016, the round as 1, and for the deadline 31st of March 2016. Applications to the UK National Agency should be completed in English. Okay, so we'll now go into the actual application and run through this with you. As we go along, we'll show you how to fill in some of the sections as well as give you some hints and tips based on the feedback from previous round. We will be using a test application form, as using an eForm from one of the previous rounds would contravene data protection rules. Okay, so this application form, which is an eForm, is available to download from the Apply for Vocational Education and Training Partnership Funding page of the Erasmus Plus website. You should save it as a PDF to your computer. Please make sure that you have downloaded the correct application form for the first round of 2016. As mentioned on the slide, you can do this by checking the following. So the key action should be cooperation for innovation and the exchange of good practice. The field, strategic partnerships for vocational education and training. The call as 2016, round 1. Okay, so as I go through the application form, I will use the scroll bar to scroll up and down the pages to the relevant sections of the form. I'll concentrate on hints and tips for each section of the form, as we go through the sections rather than describing all the information needed. I'll then concentrate on the sections dealing with project activities and budget, showing you how these link to each other, as well as giving you some hints and tips. An important feature in the Key Action 2 application forms for 2016 is that you need to choose what the main objective of your project is. And based on that choice, certain sections in the application form will appear or disappear. The two options are development of innovation and exchanges of practices. We will start off by showing you what the eForm looks like for development of innovation and then show you the differences with exchanges of practices. You will also need to select the language you are using to complete the application form from the drop-down menu. For the applications made to the UK National Agency, this should be in English. You need to input your start date and choose the duration of your project, which will automatically fill in the end date for you. The start date must be between 1st of September and 31st of December 2016. However, please note that the latest possible end date for your project is 31st of August 2019. Okay, so moving on to section C, which is priorities. Here, you will have to select the most relevant horizontal or sectoral priority for your project. As you can see, your main priority should be a horizontal or VET priority if you are applying in the field of vocational education and training. If you choose a horizontal one, you will need to explain how it links to the VET field specifically. If your application addresses the horizontal priority, inclusive education, training and youth, it will be considered as highly relevant. However, you will need to make sure it is in line with the objectives of your project and explain your choice clearly in the box below. You can select two or more priorities here, and here you can also select other fields in case your application has a cross-sectoral approach. Okay, so moving on to section D, which is the participating organizations. Section D.1 is for your organization as the applicant. Section D.2 onwards are for any partner organizations that will be included in the project. Remember, when you put in your PIC and your partner's PIC numbers, the information will automatically populate from the information from the participant portal. Check the details, and if you notice any details are incorrect for you or your partner, you will need to correct this in the portal. You should also check that the information in the partner mandates matches the information in this section for you and your partner's organization details. If any of the information in the mandate doesn't match the application form, you'll need to go back to your partner to amend the mandate. Please note that all participating organizations need to be identified in the application form, and you won't be able to add partners at a later stage. It's also important to remember that a better quality application will be specific and name staff members who will be delivering the project and their skills. Please explain how your organization's previous experience of delivering projects or activities has built the skills and knowledge needed for the activities you propose in this application. Moreover, include details of the people your organization typically works with in terms of geographic location and any additional needs they might have, if you feel this information is relevant. Also, please explain how the activities proposed in this application fit into other programs or activities you deliver. This will help the assessors understand how the proposal is innovative or complementary to other initiatives that your organization is already involved in. And finally, make sure it's clear from the description of each partner's work and expertise why they have been chosen to participate in your project. This applies to all partners, including smaller organizations which may be involved. Okay, so each page of the application has a validate button, so you can check information as you go. This will identify if any mandatory sections have been missed so far and any errors in the way the information has been input. As you can see, we need to select what type of organization our applicant is. You can see that the form directs us to the next area or box where there is information missing. In this case, the email address is not in the correct format. Okay, so moving on to section E, which is the description of the project. As well as the description of the project, your application will be of higher quality if you explain the rationale behind the project and if you can demonstrate that your project is based on a genuine needs analysis that you or one of your stakeholders or partners has done. Including details of this can also show why you have included certain partners, which would help the assessors understand the choice, which is after all one of the criteria they are assessing. Make sure you demonstrate that each transnational face-to-face partner meeting is necessary for achieving the results of the project. Make sure that the number of partner meetings is appropriate, as assessors consider that hosting more than one partner meeting could be excessive unless well justified. Show that the planned participants are appropriate to the project activities, as this will support your request for budget under transnational project meetings heading. Make sure your results fit with the objectives of the project and that they are realistic and achievable. You should also provide details of which partners will be involved in producing each result and when they will become available. Make sure you know what is meant by results. Please go to page 301 of the programme guide for the Commission's definition. If you are unsure about what a strategic partnership project can be, have a look at page 285 of the programme guide, which gives examples of strategic partnerships. For VET, page 286 gives a good example. Okay, so section E.1 is participants. Please double check the definition of participants with fewer opportunities on your handout to make sure you are aware of what this covers. Okay, so moving on to section F, which is preparation. Here, you should mention any prep activities that will take place before the start of your project activities, including practical arrangements and also including anything you have done so far before putting in your application. But please remember that funding cannot cover any costs made before the start date of your project. Okay, so section F.1 looks at project management. In this section, give as much detail as you can. For example, when describing your monitoring activities, mention how you will coordinate activities within the partnership and how you will identify and resolve any risks within your project. The best quality projects will use qualitative and quantitative indicators of achievement in order to assess whether and to what extent the project has achieved its objectives and results, which help to demonstrate the impact of your project. If you have these, please give details in this section. List the indicators and attach numerical targets to quantitative indicators where possible, and who will analyze these. Examples of indicators include measures of skill levels attained to establish the impact of new methods on participants and measures of the quality of the results produced. Methods to measure achievement may include surveys, web analytics, and interviews. Excuse me. Okay, so moving on to section G, which is implementation. The numbering of the sections from the implementation section onwards will change depending on the sections you select to complete. You should ensure that the activities selected are relevant to the type of project you plan to deliver and to its objectives, and make sure that all the relevant sections are completed. We will cover this section in more detail as it relates to the activities which will feed into the budget. It is very important to keep in mind that the data here will need to correspond to the data in the budget section. Otherwise, you will not be able to validate your eForm. As we've selected Development of Innovation in section B, section G.1 Intellectual Output will appear here. Intellectual outputs are substantial and high-quality tangible outcomes. Each intellectual output is a total result, not a process to reach a result. It can be a product such as curricula, pedagogical work materials, open educational resources, IT tools, analysis, studies, or peer learning methods. Dissemination plans or project evaluation reports are not considered as intellectual outputs. So, for instance, a general project website is not considered an intellectual output, and costs related to a website will be covered under project management and implementation budget heading. Under development of innovation projects, we would normally expect you to develop intellectual outputs. Therefore, you would select Yes from the drop-down menu to generate the relevant parts of the application form you need to complete. You must ensure that any intellectual outputs listed meet the eligibility criteria and clearly explain the resources that you will need to produce the planned intellectual outputs, as this will be essential to justify your budget request. If you are not planning to develop any intellectual outputs as part of your project, you should consider whether it would be more appropriate to select exchange of practices as the main objective of your project under Section B context.
Okay, we will now show you how to complete this section to make sure the budget section of the application form correctly. You will need to include a title, a description of the intellectual output, as well as describe the prep work and methodology for the intellectual output. We recommend to include details here of the type of staff and dates required to outcomes to prevent potential overlap with manager and administrative staff costs, which normally should be covered under project management and implementation. In addition, if you need to use any subcontractors or to purchase specialist equipment to produce the intellectual output, you will need to make it clear in this section. To demonstrate that intellectual outputs are substantial, it may be helpful to explain how you have calculated the resources needed for each intellectual output. You'll also need to indicate when you will start and end work on the intellectual output, as well as show which languages the intellectual output will be available in, what type of media it is, and which organization will be working on it. I will talk you through the information Rufna is inputting into the form at the moment. The fields for output title, description, and tasks and methodology are mandatory, so we have written tests in here for the purposes of this demonstration. Rufna has selected the start and end date. It is important to mention here that we recommend you use the calendar function to select the dates, or remember to input the date in the correct format, that is date -month -year. Otherwise, the form will not validate. Rufna has chosen the languages the intellectual output will be produced in and the format. She has also chosen which organization will lead the production of the intellectual output and any other organizations in the partnership that will work on it. If you make a mistake, you can remove the last option in the list. And you can add as many intellectual outputs as you need. To show you how to complete the budget section later in the form, Rufna is just adding a second intellectual output. You'll see throughout the form that there are plus and minus buttons, which will allow you to add extra line or remove the last line from any option, the way Rufna did to remove the second language from the first intellectual output. There are also add and remove buttons if it's possible to add a whole extra activity under a particular budget heading, like Rufna did to add a second intellectual output. So Rufna is just now completing the information we need for the second intellectual output. So again, the start and end date, the language the intellectual output will be in, and the format of the intellectual output. Now we chose activity leading organization and participating organizations as well. Okay. Moving on, multiplier events. Multiplier events are only applicable if you plan to deliver intellectual outputs, and they must be national or transnational events aimed specifically at disseminating intellectual outputs. So if there are no intellectual outputs, there can be no multiply events, and this question won't appear in the application form. Examples of multiply events are national or transnational conferences, seminars, and events. Training courses, webinars, piloting sessions, and meetings are not considered as multiplier events. A very important point here is that multiply events cannot take place before an intellectual output has been at least partially developed. The main goal of the multiplier event is the dissemination of and general support for the intellectual outputs. They can be used to disseminate other project results as well, but this should never be the main purpose. Multiplier events must take place in the countries of the organizations participating in the project. They can also take place at the seat of an institution of the European Union, even if none of the participating organization is from Belgium, Germany, Luxembourg, France, or the Netherlands. Only participants from organizations other than the beneficiary organizations can be counted in the number of individuals for the purposes of determining the grant amount. These participants can be local, that is from the country when the event is taking place, or international, that is from other countries. If you're planning to include multiply events, choose Yes from the drop-down menu to generate multiply events parts of the application. Now I'll talk you through the information that Rufna is inputting for the multiply event. Like with intellectual outputs, you will need to include a title and description for any multiply events, so Rufna is just inputting test for the demonstration. She's also selected the country of the event where the event is taking place. We'll choose the UK. Okay, and she will also now choose which intellectual output will be disseminated. So as you can see, we've chosen the UK for the country the event will take place, as the lead will be the UK organization. For the dates, again, please remember that the multiply event should take place after an intellectual output is finished or almost finished. As I mentioned, all multiply events must be linked to intellectual outputs, so we've selected the first intellectual output. You also need to select which organizations are participating in the event. So Rufna has selected one organization as the lead and the other organizations as participating organizations. You can add as many multiply events as you need, but the funding is limited to a maximum of €30,000 per project. Rufna is just now adding a second multiply event, so we can easily show you how the budget is completed. Rufna has inputted the event title and the country of venue, as well as the event description. With this event, we've selected the other organization to be the lead. So since this organization is based in Finland, we've chosen Finland for the country where the event will take place. So just to highlight that once again, the plus and minus buttons will allow you to add and remove rows from each item under each multiplier event you add. So Rufna is again choosing which intellectual output will be covered during this multiplier event. She's chosen the leading organization as the Finnish one, and the other two will be participating organizations. Okay, let's move on. Learning, teaching, and training activities can be included if they are clearly linked to the project objectives. For example, you might include piloting of your intellectual outputs with the appropriate target group if this involves a mobility aspect. The program guide lists eligible activities and duration on pages 111, 114, and 280 onwards. If you include learning, teaching, and training activities, you should clearly explain how they support the achievement of your project objectives and whether you plan to use any EU tools such as Europass, EGVET, or any national instruments to validate the learning outcomes of the participants. We would strongly encourage you to consider using EGVET, which will in turn strengthen your application in respect to the quality of the tools for validating participants' learning outcomes. So if you're planning to include learning, teaching, and training activities, choose Yes from the drop-down menu to generate and complete this part of application. You'll need to choose the appropriate field and activity type and provide a detailed description. If your project is only focused on VET, then we would expect to see activities only in the field of vocational education and training. The other fields are available as options if you're planning a cross-field project with a focus on VET. It's important to explain how the activity is adding value to the project and linked to its objectives. Okay, so I'll talk you through now the information for the learning, teaching and training activity as Rufna is inputting it. We've chosen vocational education and training as the field and blended mobility of vet learners as the activity type. As a reminder, the program guide contains information about the different types of activities that are possible for each field. When you input the number of participants, this is the total number for this activity, which includes participants with special needs and any accompanying persons. You'll need to input the duration in either days or months, which depends on the activity type you selected. Since Rufna chose an activity that can only have a short duration, the box for months is grayed out and can't be typed in. To demonstrate how this changes, Rufna is changing the activity now to one which allows long-term durations. So now the duration in days is grayed out and can't be typed in. And when you put the number of months, the number of days will be automatically calculated based on the amount of months you input. Like with intellectual outputs and multiply events, you can add as many learning, teaching and training activities that you need with the Add Activity button. Please be aware that learning, teaching and training activities should include participants from beneficiary organizations from at least 2 different countries.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to section H, which is follow-up. Please remember that impact is a very important element in Erasmus Plus projects, and you must therefore show the importance of your proposal on your target groups and beyond, as well as on local, regional, national and European level. Excuse me. Also, please be aware that at assessment stage, in case of 2 projects score the same, we will be looking to compare the individual scores under impact and dissemination quality criterion. Think about any added value of realizing the project on a European level and put this in here. Plan for dissemination activities to take part throughout your project lifetime and not just at the end. Have a look at Annex 2 of the program guide, which provides practical guidance on dissemination of your project. Demonstrate that dissemination will reach and engage all your partners, stakeholders and wider network. And finally, make sure it's clear that your plans for sharing results of your project do not contain disproportionate limitations to free access from the public. If you do intend to introduce any limitations, you will need to explain and justify this here. Okay, so moving on to section I, which is the budget section. You will find more detailed guidance on how to complete the budget section in our application guidance and in Part B of the program guide. Getting the budget right is a quality criterion. Projects with a correct and duly justified budget are more likely to score highly than those that do not. The maximum total grant available for any strategic partnerships in the field of vet is €450,000, which comes down to £12,500 per month, multiplied by a maximum duration of 36 months. However, the amount you request depends on your activities. It is important to note that the budget under all cost headings are built up on a unit cost basis per participant, except for exceptional costs and special needs support, which are budgeted for and reimbursed on the basis of actual costs. Unit costs are a set amount per participant, which is a contribution towards the cost. For some unit costs, you will spend more, and for some perhaps less than the unit cost. Unit costs are used to help make the funding simpler to understand and manage. For actual or real costs, as the name suggests, you will receive funding for a proportion of the actual costs incurred. Real costs are used for the budget headings exceptional costs and special needs support. However, you cannot always claim the full amount. For travel from outermost and overseas territories for participants in teaching, training and learning activities, you can claim up to 80% of the eligible costs. For exceptional costs, this is only up to 75% of the eligible costs. One exception to this are special needs support costs, where you can claim up to 100% of the eligible costs. All projects will have at least project management and implementation and transnational partner meeting budgets. Section I.1, Project Management and Implementation, which is based on a unit cost. This component of the grant is a contribution to general project management and smaller scale project implementation activities, such as project management, like planning, managing finances, coordination, communication between the partners. Also, these can be smaller scale learning, teaching and training materials, tools and approaches. You can also cover here virtual cooperation and local project activities, for example, classroom project work with learners, work activities, organisation and mentoring of embedded learning or teaching training activities. And finally, such activities such as smaller scale information promotion and dissemination activities, for example, brochures, leaflets and websites. The amount payable is based on the duration of the strategic partnership and the number of partners involved. €500 per month is payable as a contribution to the activities of the coordinating organisation and €250 per month for each participating organisation, up to a maximum total of €2,750 per month. You will note that in the case of projects involving more than 10 participating organisations, this component of the grant will be limited to the equivalent payable for 10 participating organisations, which is 1 coordinator and 9 partners. Otherwise, this should be over the maximum. As you can see, this section of the budget is automatically completed based on the number of organisations that were included in section D in the beginning of the application form.
Okay, let's move on to section I.2, transnational project meetings, which is also based on unit costs. This component of the grant is a contribution to travel and subsistence costs for meetings hosted by the participating organizations. You will need to click the plus button to create a line for each partner. Costs are based on three distance bands. You'll need to use the distance calculator to fill this out. A link to this is provided in the guidance to applicants. The distance is from cities and towns, so choose the nearest one to your head office and the head office of your partners. The band that comes up is the band which you will need to input into the application form. This will then automatically populate with the unit cost. This cost is a contribution towards the return journey costs. Please ensure that you put in the right band, as this will be checked at the assessment, and if incorrect, it would affect the quality of the application. So Rufna is inputting the information about the partner meetings that each organization will attend. You should bear in mind that if you say you're having 5 partner meetings hosted by each partner, then you would complete this section with 4 partner meetings each, rather than 5, as each partner will host 1 meeting and attend 4 meetings. This sounds obvious, but again, this is a common mistake and could affect the quality of the application. So in this example, there are a total of 3 meetings planned, with each partner hosting 1 each. Rufna is now going to switch the distance calculator to work out the correct distance band. The distance calculator works by you inputting the town or city that will be the point of departure and arrival for the partner meeting. Our test organizations are based in Birmingham, Helsinki and Barcelona. As you can see, when Rufna starts to type the name of the location, the distance calculator suggests location. Clicking the Calculate button will provide the distance in kilometers, and it is this number which dictates which distance band you will need to select. As you can see, the distance from Birmingham to Helsinki and Birmingham to Barcelona will fall into the same distance band. So Rufna will now switch back to the application form, and she will input this information. In this case, the UK organization will attend 2 meetings within the same distance band, so 100 to 1,999 kilometers, so both of those meetings can be included in one row. Rufna will now go back to the distance calculator to check the distance between the Finnish and the Spanish organizations. Okay, as you can now see, the distance between Helsinki and Barcelona will qualify for a different distance band, so above 2,000 kilometers. So that is why Rufna will now go back to the application and she will input each meeting for those 2 organizations into separate rows. Okay, after inputting the information about the organizations, numbers of meetings and participants, and the distance band, the amounts per participant and in total will automatically generate. Okay, in section I.3, intellectual outputs, this is also based on unit costs. The funding can only be used for staff costs for the organizations directly involved in the production of the intellectual outputs, and this must be clearly justified in the body of the application. Important to mention here is that staff costs for managers and administrative staff are expected to be covered already under project management and implementation, unless the development of the intellectual output is identified as a distinctive separate role for the managers and administrative staff in question, but this should be very clearly justified. If not, these costs will be cut. So Rufna will now add the budget information for the two intellectual outputs that we created earlier in the application form. As said before, information you add in the budget should be clearly reflected in earlier section. Rufna has added 5 rows using the plus button. You should use a new row for any change in the organization, intellectual output, staff category, or number of days to ensure the budget completes correctly. As you can see, Rufna has included a small number of manager days for intellectual output 1. As I mentioned, if you do include any manager or administrative days, please clearly justify these, otherwise they may be cut. As Rufna completes each row, you can see that the budget is automatically filled in. The cost generated by the category of staff and number of days should be clearly linked to the description of the intellectual outputs in section G above. Okay, next section is section I.4, multiply events, which is also based on unit costs. This budget heading is only applicable to projects planning to organize national or transnational events aimed at disseminating intellectual outputs produced by the project. Therefore, a project which does not plan to deliver intellectual outputs cannot be awarded funding under this budget heading. Please be aware that the costs for travel and subsistence of the representatives of the participating organizations are not included in this. Important to note as well is that only participants from organizations other than the beneficiary organizations can be counted in the number of individuals for the purposes of determining the grant amount. These participants can be local, meaning from the country where the event is taking place, or international, so from other countries. The cost should be clearly linked to the description of the multiplier event in section G above, and as mentioned earlier, multiplier events should not take place before intellectual output they refer to has been developed. The costs are calculated on a unit cost basis up to a maximum of 30,000 euros per project. Okay, so let's have a look at what Rufna did here. Rufna added the budget information for the two multiplier events. Once again, it is important to use a different row based on the information that you're entering. For multiplier events, you should use a different row for any change in the organization and the multiplier event. You don't need to use a different row for local and international participants, as long as the organization and the multiplier event are the same. As you can see, Rufna has used one row for my organization and 2 rows for Kimo, since Kimo will be including participants in both multiplier events. This is also why Kimo has international participants for multiplier event 1, since this multiplier event will be based in the UK, and their participants will be from Finland. Okay, next section is section I.5. Funding for learning, teaching and training activities is based on unit costs again. Funding should be only requested under these budget headings where your project intends to deliver transnational training, teaching or learning activities within the strategic partnership. The added value of these mobility activities needs to be addressed in the body of the application form. There are a few subheadings under this section. The first one is travel. This is a contribution to the travel cost of participants, including accompanying persons from their place of origin to the venue of their activity and the return journey. You will also have to use the distance calculator for this, but the form uses different rates when you enter the distance. So Rufna is now inputting the travel information using a row for the participants from each organization. Obviously, when you're completing your application form, you would need to use the distance calculator again to check which distance band to use. Rufna has made sure that the number of participants included here matches the total number of participants included earlier in the form. This is very important because any inconsistencies here would either affect your grant requested or even prevent the form from validating. Okay, next section is individual support. Here, the contribution for participants partaking in any long-term or short-term learning, teaching and training activities will be calculated depending on the duration of the activity. Accompanying persons should be listed separately on the right-hand side. Since the activity we chose earlier was a long-term duration, Rufna is completing the long-term section. The form will not allow you to add a short-term activity under the long-term section. If you're trying to complete the long-term section and no learning, teaching and training activities are available for you to choose, you should check the earlier section of the form to make sure you selected the correct activity and input the correct duration in the correct box. Once again, Rufna has made sure that the number of participants and accompanying persons matches the information in the earlier section of the form. So Rufna is just finishing inputting the information for the individual support for the long-term learning, teaching and training activities, the number of participants and accompanying persons, as well as the duration, and everything is automatically calculated.
Okay, let's move on to linguistic support. This is a contribution to costs associated with language support. Linguistic support can be offered to participants to improve their knowledge of the language of the host country in order to support their active participation. Any costs requested under this budget heading must be clearly justified within the body of the application. The application won't allow you to request linguistic support if you don't have learning, teaching, training activity that meets the minimum duration. So I'm just going to add some information here. Select the activity type. And the number of participants. If you need to add linguistic support but the form won't let you, you should check section G where you input all the learning, teaching and training activities details. Okay, let's move on to exceptional costs for overseas countries and territories travel costs. If you plan to organise learning, teaching and training activities and you want to involve participants from the outermost regions and overseas countries and territories, then it is possible to request extra funding for travel for those participants. You will have to indicate what organisation the participants are linked to and what activity they will partake in. Please make sure you clearly justify why you are requesting these costs. It's also important to note here that the number of participants here need to match the numbers put into the descriptive part in section G. If this is not the case, the form will not validate, so please double check this. Section I.6 is special needs, which is based on a real cost. This budget heading is only applicable if you plan to involve participants with special needs in your project, resulting in additional costs. This component of the grant is based on an estimate of the likely actual costs relating specifically to the needs of participants with disabilities. In the budget section, you will need to identify the activities that the requested cost relates to. The participation of individuals with special needs must be justified in the main body of the application form, and you can claim up to 100% of these real costs. So I'm just going to add some information here. Okay. As a reminder, a person with special needs is defined under Erasmus Plus as a potential participant whose physical, mental or health-related situation is such that his or her participation in the project would not be possible without extra financial support. Okay, so moving on to section I.7, which is exceptional costs. This budget heading relates exclusively to actual costs relating to subcontracting or the purchase of goods or services that cannot be delivered or provided by the organisations participating in the project for duly justified reasons. Any costs requested under this heading must be clearly justified within the application, as we mentioned earlier. Where such costs are justified, 75% of the eligible costs will be payable up to a maximum of €50,000 per project. As mentioned before, exceptional costs relating to travel of participants from outermost regions and overseas countries and territories will fall under category 1.5.4 above. We have had previous applicants budgeting for visa costs for partners, staff and participants under this category. However, visa costs are not considered exceptional costs under this specific key action. If they are from staff members of the participating organisations, they should be covered under project management and implementation. If they are for participants attending a multiplier event, they should come under that category. If participants in learning, teaching and training activities need a visa, you will need to absorb this into the costs associated with these activities. In respect to special needs support and exceptional costs description, the application form allows you to write up to 5,000 characters, so please make sure that any requests for these costs are clearly described and justified in the application form. Okay, so moving on to section J, which is the project summary. This summary will be used by the European Commission and the NA in their publications and will also feed into the Erasmus Plus project results platform, so it should be written with this in mind. It should be written in clear, plain English, avoiding any technical or sector-specific jargon to ensure that it can be understood by the general public. Sections J.1, and J.2.1 is a summary of the participating organisations, the budget summary and the project's total grant. Please check that the information is absolutely correct. So in the case it's not, you can make amendments in the earlier section. Make sure your grant requested does not exceed the maximum allowable grant, which is €12,500 per month, multiplied by the amount of months you apply for. So moving on to section N, which is the annexes. Here we go. So the compulsory annexes are the signed declaration of honour, the scanned mandates of each participating organisation to the applicant, signed by both parties, and a completed timetable of activities, also known as the project timetable spreadsheet. These documents can be downloaded from the Apply for Vocational Education and Training Partnership funding page of the Erasmus Plus website. Your project application will be ineligible without these attachments. I'll now switch to a completed timetable. The timetable uses the same letters that appear in the application for intellectual outputs, multiplier events, and learning, teaching and training activities. Some activities don't have a letter in the application, but these are explained in the box underneath. Oh. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see this now. It's a good idea to use these letters throughout your application when covering any project management and implementation activities like Skype meetings, local project activities, dissemination activities, etc. As you can see, we've coloured the cells to show which months each activity takes place in. This should correspond to the information that you include in your application form. Okay, I'll switch back to the application form now. Okay, now before we continue on to the submission part, we just want to show you what happens if you select exchange of practices as the main objectives of your project. So I'm just going to scroll back up to section B. And I'm just going to select the main objective of the project as exchanges of practices. Okay, I'll just scroll back down to section G to show you how the form changes. Keep scrolling. nearly there. There we go. Okay, so up until section G, implementation, the eForm looks the same as how we filled it in. As you can see, the sections for intellectual outputs and multiplier events are now missing. The application form jumps straight to learning, teaching and training activities. And the numbering is therefore slightly different. So I'll just scroll down to the budget section. Here in the budget section as well, the sections on intellectual outputs and multiplier events are missing. Okay, so the next section is O, which is submission. There we go. Okay, so now a few final hints and tips on the submission procedure. Validate as you go and after completing the application form. You'll be taken to any sections that are incorrect or have been missed, like this one here. These will need to be resolved before you can submit the form. Please remember to refer to section K, the checklist, and read the data protection notice. Ensure you are connected to the internet when you submit your application and save the final completed version of your application form to your PC in case of any submission issues. Please note that the deadline mentioned in the form is Brussels time. The form needs to be submitted online by the UK by 11 AM UK time on 31st of March 2016. We would advise you to leave plenty of time in completing your application and then submitting it online before the deadline in case of any unexpected technical difficulties. So I'll just press validate, and there you can see the form is now valid. Okay, so we'll just switch back to the presentation now. Okay, so let's hear from you now. So Eva's going to launch a second poll for you, and we would appreciate your answer on the following question. Do you intend to submit a Key Action 2 VET application for the 31st of March deadline?
Okay, we have the results in, so it looks like the majority of you is intending to submit a K2 VET application for the 31st of March deadline, which is very positive, and we are hoping that we will be able to help you with the application with this webinar and our guidance for applicants that you can find on our website.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to application requirements. So once we have received your application, we will check its eligibility. Your application will not go forward to assessment if your start and end date as well as the project duration are not in line with the criteria specified in the program guide on page 113. Or if your budget requested from Erasmus Plus is more than the maximum, or if you do not have the minimum number of program country partners, or if you submitted your application after 11 AM on 31st of March 2016. As part of the assessment process, the national agency will also check that the requested budget is in line with the funding rules set out in Part B of the programme guide. If these rules are not respected, your requested budget may be reduced on assessment. Please make sure that you carefully read the programme guide and the national agency's guidance available on our websites for further details on the eligibility requirements before you submit your application. The Erasmus Plus national agencies will be validating your organisation and your partner organisations. However, this is a separate process and not linked to your assessment of your application. Therefore, your organisation being validated does not imply a successful outcome of your application. During the validation process, we will check whether all the information you put in the participant portal is complete and correct. We will check whether the required legal and financial forms have been uploaded, as well as the supporting documents. The verification of the financial capacity does not apply to public bodies and international organisations. In cases of EU grant requests submitted by other types of organisations and not exceeding €60,000, you must provide a declaration of honour certifying that you have the financial capacity to implement the project. This declaration of honour constitutes a specific section of the application form. In cases of EU grant requests submitted by other types of organisation and exceeding €60,000, you must submit your organisation's most recent profit and loss account and balance sheet. For entities which cannot provide the above documents because they are newly created, a financial declaration or insurance declaration stating the applicant's professional risks may replace the above documents. Please note, organisations that are not validated may not be able to take part in Erasmus Plus funded projects. You or your partners not being able to provide the correct or complete documents can cause significant delays to the contracting process and can even result in the NA withdrawing its offer of funding. Therefore, please ensure you are clear about the requirements and communicate these to your partners as early as possible. So some key points to remember about the budget. The maximum budget is a variable amount defined by multiplying €12,500 per month for the duration of the project with a maximum of €450,000 for 36 months. The grant is a contribution to project costs based on either unit cost or real cost budget items. When a contribution is based on unit cost funding will be automatically calculated depending on the unit. For example, this can be the number of participants for a certain duration or a set cost per distance travelled. Budget headings using unit costs are project management and implementation, transnational project meetings, intellectual outputs, and multiplier events. Under learning, teaching and training activities, travel, individual support and linguistic support are also contributions based on unit costs. Contributions based on real costs apply for the following budget headings: special needs support and exceptional costs, as well as exceptional costs under learning, teaching and training activities. Special needs support can be up to 100% of eligible costs. However, for exceptional costs, this is 75%. For expensive travel costs for participants from outermost regions and overseas countries and territories under learning, teaching and training activities, you can request up to 80% of eligible costs. Your budget should be appropriate to your activity and demonstrate cost-effective use of resources. Several of the budget lines are conditional on you demonstrating added value, and you will need to clearly justify, especially for real costs, why you are requesting a certain amount of funding. Please note, for strategic partnerships supporting exchange of good practice, it is not possible to request a budget for intellectual outputs or multiplier events. So the following documents must be annexed to the application form. The Declaration of Honour, signed by the legal representative mentioned in the application form, the mandates of each partner to the applicant signed by both parties and with information identical to the information about the partners in the application form, and the project timetable template. We recommend that you scan different documents together into a single file. If, after checking that the annexes are within the size and file formats, you're still experiencing problems with attaching annexes, you can email them to erasmusplus@ecoris.com, clearly stating which application form they relate to by providing the application hash code and your organization's details, as well as the project's name. But only do this as an exception and ensure you have followed the available guidance first. You must ensure that you have validated all sections of the application before submitting. You will need to ensure that you're connected to the internet in order to submit your completed application. You should also ensure that all sections of the form are valid and all annexes are attached before submitting the form. If there are any technical issues preventing the form from being submitted, it will say error under status. If this happens and you are unable to submit the form, you should follow the alternative submission process as described in the guidance for applicants. In this case, you can still submit your application by sending it via email to us within 2 hours following the official deadline. However, the UK National Agency will only accept alternative submissions if the error message is recorded under status in the submission summary section of the eForm with a timestamp prior to or on the deadline date and time. The following error messages are not accepted as technical issues. So the first one is error 01, as this error relates to invalid data or missing fields in the eForm. This is not considered to be a technical issue and can be rectified by correcting the application form and validating it again. Error 06, as this error means that there are errors within the annexes, meaning that the total size of the attachments exceeds 5 megabytes or that they are not in the accepted file formats specified in section N of the application form. This can be rectified either by reducing the size of the attachments or by removing them. The error code unknown, this means that the eForm was not submitted and no submission attempts were made. Local 01, in order to submit the eForm, you must click the appropriate options in the yellow security warning bar at the top of the form. And the error code local 02 means in order to submit the eForm, you should check your internet connection and try to submit the form again or try a different network connection. Please note that the National Agency is aware of an issue with the eForm. If your application does not include any teaching, training and learning activities, you may receive the error message error 01 submission validation error when you try to validate and submit the application. To find out how to rectify this error, please go to page 56 in our Guide for Applicants version 2, which is available on our website. A couple more hints and tips before we conclude. Before and while you complete your application, refer to the Commission's documents, first of all the Programme Guide and the National Agency's own guidance available from our website. If you have applied before, don't forget to review the feedback you have received from us, as this will include key areas of improvement which will enhance your chances of submitting a good quality application. Please remember that only one application can be submitted by the same partnership under the 31st of March deadline. Please save the form frequently so no information is lost. Ensure correct options are selected on the application so that important sections are not deleted. And as I said before, while looking through the application form, double check that the budget you request is accurate and well justified and that you respect the maximum amounts allowable. Please also make sure you provide relevant answers to the questions in the application, but remember that there is a character limit on many of the sections. You can see the limit by hovering your mouse over the answer boxes. A good idea is to get someone else to proofread your application and annexes, perhaps against the published award criteria. And finally, leave enough time for completing and submitting your application well before the deadline of 31st of March 2016. Okay, so to conclude, I'd like to remind you of the support the UK National Agency will be offering in the run-up to the 31st of March deadline for applications to be submitted under Key Action 2 Vocational Education and Training. A recording of this webinar will be sent to you in the next couple of days. After the webinar, you will be redirected to a feedback form. Please do fill this out, as we aim to continuously improve these webinars and have taken previous feedback on board when creating the webinars on this round. A detailed guide for applicants on how to fill out the application form is available on our website. And if you haven't already done so, please sign up to our newsletter, as this provides all the most up-to-date information about the call and about the Erasmus Plus programme. On our website, you can also find other key documents, for example, the project timetable spreadsheet. So we recommend that you have a look at those. We also recommend that you have a look at the assessment criteria listed in the Guide for Assessors. This will give you an indication of what the assessors are looking for in your project application. And also, we have a helpline where our team is available to answer your questions about Key Action 2 VET application. Okay, so thank you all for your attention and participation today. We'll be around for a couple of more minutes to answer any final questions, and if there are any more that come up, please contact us via the erasmusplus@ecoris.com email address or the number on this screen. As I said before, our team is also available every day from Monday to Friday to answer any queries you may have. via the Erasmus Plus at ecorus.com inbox or our helpline, and you can see the number on the screen, and you can find it in your handout as well. If there are any questions we haven't managed to answer during the session this afternoon, we'll get back to you by email afterwards. Do also keep an eye on the Erasmus Plus website for news and further guidance. We hope you found this session useful today, and we wish you luck with your future applications. Thank you.